Here's the whole Juicero story in one image. A premium Wi-Fi juice press on one side, a soft produce pouch on the other, and a human hand doing the job everyone thought the machine had to do. That was the punchline that made Juicero famous for the wrong reason. Bloomberg reported that the proprietary packs could be squeezed by hand, and once people saw that, the $400 machine stopped looking like a breakthrough and started looking like hardware theater. The company had not sold fake juice, the packs could release juice. The problem was more embarrassing. The useful work seemed to be trapped in the bag already, while the visible product was a sleek, connected press asking customers to pay for permission to squeeze it. So, this is not just a funny story about an overbuilt kitchen gadget, it is a tech product graveyard case study about what happens when Silicon Valley wraps software, subscriptions, and expensive hardware around a simple action, then forgets to prove why the hardware has to exist. Before Juicero became a shorthand for startup excess, the pitch was easy to understand. Cold pressed juice was fashionable, messy, and expensive outside the home. Juicero promised a cleaner version, put a produce pack in the machine, press a button, and get a fresh glass without chopping, washing, or cleaning a traditional juicer. The appliance launched around the $700 level, then became known for the later $399 to $400 price point after a January 2017 price cut. That price matters because Juicero was never presented as a cheap convenience tool. It was presented as a premium connected appliance, the kind of object that belonged in a polished kitchen and spoke the language of software. It did not use loose produce. It depended on proprietary packs, QR codes, Wi-Fi connectivity, and app-based ordering. In other words, the machine was not just squeezing, it was authorizing, tracking, and connecting the customer to Juicero's supply chain. That made the product feel modern. It also made the risk obvious. If the pack already contained the prepared produce, the press had to prove it was more than a very expensive gate. That is the premium pitch in miniature, reduced mess, predictable packs, and a machine that made juice feel like a managed service instead of a kitchen task. But managed services only feel magical when the management disappears. The reason Juicero is still fascinating is that serious people believed this could be much bigger than a countertop press. The company raised about $120 million from major investors, with names reported around the story including Google Ventures and Kleiner Perkins. From the outside, that sounds absurd, venture capital for a juicer. But the investor logic was not just people like juice. The bigger idea was a fresh produce delivery and supply chain platform. If Juicero could control the packs, the ordering flow, the freshness checks, and the machine in the home, then it could turn juice into a recurring system. The press would be the installed base. The packs would be repeat purchases. The app would manage demand. The supply chain would become the moat. That is the fair version of the dream, and it is important because the failure was not caused by nobody wanting the end product. Juicero's own shutdown letter later said customers had bought more than 1 million produce packs. There was demand somewhere in the system. The question was whether that demand needed a dedicated press sitting on the counter. And the more Juicero tried to prove it was a platform, the more it had to prove the press itself was necessary. To see why the machine became controversial, walk through the user flow. A customer buys Juicero's own produce packs, the press scans a QR code, the machine connects through Wi-Fi, the app helps manage ordering. Then the press crushes the pouch and sends juice into a glass. In the most generous reading, this system had a purpose. A connected press could check whether a pack was fresh, whether it had expired, or whether the company needed to control quality. That is the kind of language a food startup can defend. But the same system also created the opposite feeling. When a machine has to approve a pouch before squeezing it, convenience starts looking like lock-in. Critics interpreted the QR code and connectivity layer as a kind of control system for Juicero's own packs. That is why the QR code matters in the story. It was not just a tiny technical detail. It told customers that the bag, the machine, and the company's servers were part of the same permission chain. That mattered because a kitchen appliance normally earns trust by being simple. Juicero asked customers to trust a closed loop: the pack, the scanner, the network, the app, the supply chain, and the press. If any one of those pieces felt unnecessary, the whole system looked heavier than the job. The strange part is that the press was not obviously cheap junk. Juicero described the machine as applying about 4 tons of force to extract juice from the pouch. A teardown later framed the device as impressively engineered, and that is what makes the story sharper. This was not a plastic toy pretending to be a product. It was a serious-looking product solving the wrong visible problem. 4 tons of force sounds powerful. Complex internals sound impressive, but power only matters when the hard part is actually hard for the user. If the prepared produce pack already did most of the work by containing chopped, crushed, or otherwise ready-to-squeeze ingredients, then the press was competing with the packaging itself. That is hardware theater. The machine performs intensity while the customer only needs outcome. The more impressive the device looked, the more fragile the premise became, because every extra part raised the same question. What exact pain does this solve that the bag and a pair of hands do not solve well enough? The machine looked overqualified for the job. The business problem was that the bag was overqualified too. The economics made that question even tougher. Juicero's single-serve produce packs cost around $5 to $7 a piece. That means the customer was not only buying an expensive press, they were buying into a recurring food system with perishable inventory, freshness expectations, ordering, shipping, and enough operational complexity to make a simple glass of juice feel like a logistics project. Again, the generous version is real. Fresh produce is hard. A consistent home juice product needs sourcing, packaging, cold chain discipline, and quality control. But that also means the pouch was the center of the business. The pouch carried the ingredients. The pouch carried the freshness problem. The pouch carried the recurring revenue. The press, by contrast, was a fixed cost sitting at home. It could not solve the hardest nationwide problem by itself, getting fresh packs made, moved, and replaced quickly enough for customers to keep using them. So the press had to justify itself on top of the most expensive and fragile part of the system. If the company was really selling a fresh food supply chain, the hardware needed to make that supply chain feel easier, faster, or meaningfully better every morning. If it did not, the customer was left with a costly machine attached to costly packs. Then came the moment that compressed the entire business into a meme. Bloomberg tested the produce packs and reported that they could be squeezed by hand. The public did not need a long technical paper after that. It had a simple comparison. On one side, a connected press associated with a $399 to $400 price point, a QR system, proprietary packs, and a claim of massive force. On the other side, someone squeezing the pouch. The devastating part was not that Juicero made no juice. The devastating part was that the product's most visible piece looked optional. A more ordinary product could have survived a rough review. This one had a visual contradiction. The machine advertised force, but the test highlighted bypassability. Even if the press was cleaner, more consistent, or easier for some users, the story had already become smaller than the defense. People could understand the failure in one sentence. The $400 machine squeezed a bag that hands could squeeze too. That is brutal because products do not only compete on engineering truth, they compete on mental models. If the customer believes the machine is the magic, you have to protect that belief. If the customer discovers the bag is the magic, the machine becomes a question mark. And once the internet understands your product in one sentence, your official explanation has to be even simpler. Juicero still had a defense, but it was a complicated defense. The connected system could be described as an experience less prep, less cleanup, QR checks, freshness control, app ordering, and a controlled supply chain. Those are not imaginary features. They are just not the features the public was now judging. After the hand squeeze story, the question was not whether Juicero had built software around juice. The question was whether the software and press delivered enough value to survive the hand comparison. That is where the company lost the frame. A customer can accept a closed system when the benefit is obvious. Coffee pods are easy to understand because the machine turns a pod into hot coffee. Juicero's problem was that the pouch already looked like the key object. After the backlash, the company offered full refunds to unhappy press customers. That response mattered because it showed the issue had moved beyond features. It was now a trust problem, and trust is hard to rebuild when your product has become the joke. The collapse was not only one viral article, there were cracks before and after it. The machine had already been cut from $699 to $399 in January 2017 after slow sales. Later reporting described cost reductions, including layoffs in July 2017. Then, on September 1, 2017, Juicero suspended sales of the press and its produce packs and said it was seeking a buyer. At shutdown, the company offered press refunds for 90 days. The most revealing detail is that Juicero's letter said customers had bought more than 1 million produce packs. That makes the ending less simple than nobody wanted juice. Some customers clearly bought the consumables, but the company also said that building an effective nationwide fresh food manufacturing and distribution system required infrastructure it could not build alone. That sequence matters because it separates satire from root cause. The meme hurt, but the company was also battling adoption, costs, and a distribution challenge that made every new customer operationally expensive. That is the real autopsy. Juicero tried to be a hardware company, a food company, a logistics company, and a connected platform at the same time. When the most famous public image became a hand squeezing the bag, all of that complexity had to defend itself at once. It could not. That is why Juicero still works as a product lesson years later. The story compressed an entire startup pattern into one absurd visual. Take a simple user action, add a custom machine, add proprietary consumables, add an app, add connectivity, add a supply chain, then call the whole thing a platform. Sometimes that works, but it only works when every layer makes the user experience obviously better. Juicero's fresh food logistics challenge was real, and the teardown coverage suggested the press itself was not lazily built. The failure was fit. The visible hardware did not earn its role strongly enough before the simpler alternative arrived. The counterfactual is simple. If Juicero had sold the pack system without an expensive press, or if the press had done something hands clearly could not do, the story might have landed differently. The fatal middle ground was asking people to buy both. That is the lesson for any product team tempted to make hardware because hardware feels defensible. A machine is not a moat if the customer can route around it. A connected ecosystem is not a strategy if the user only wanted the outcome inside the pouch. So the lesson is not just, do not build a smart juicer. It is sharper, do not add hardware until the hardware is the bottleneck. So the graveyard rule is simple. If the cheapest version of the behavior works without your hardware, the hardware must deliver a benefit the user can feel immediately. Not in a pitch deck, not in a supply chain diagram, immediately. Juicero did not fail because juice was impossible, or because freshness did not matter, or because engineering is bad. It failed because the press had to justify an entire ecosystem, and then the bag made the press look optional. That is how a premium connected appliance becomes remembered as the $400 machine that squeezed a bag. And in the next product graveyard, the pattern shows up again. Infrastructure arrives first, user need arrives second, and the market refuses to pretend the order makes sense.